As journalism faces new challenges with the era of digitalization, podcasts are finding new audiences with their mix of news, commentary, and personal stories.
Yep, and Sara Wayne talks to Michael O'Connell, the host and producer of the weekly It's All Journalism podcast, on the unique challenges beginner podcasters will face in producing professional-level audio for online distribution.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hello, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you for joining us here in Jakarta, Indonesia, all the way from Washington, D.C. First things first, can you please tell us about your podcast, It's All Journalism, and why did you start this podcast in the first place?
It's All Journalism is a weekly podcast that involves us interviewing journalists about how they do their jobs. I started the podcast in 2012 with two coworkers. We had all been part of the interactive journalism program at American University in Washington, D.C. And one of the features of that program was that because we live in Washington, D.C., there are many journalists in this city. And, our industry was changing. Digital media kind of disrupted newsrooms. And, I had gone back to school in order to pick up some digital skills. So when our class wrapped up, the three of us, one of the things we missed most was having these conversations with working journalists. And so we decided, well, why don't we do a podcast? Because I was a huge fan of podcasts at that time, and we worked at a radio station, so it was very easy for us to get, access to audio equipment. And that's really kind of the origin of the podcast. The two other people that I had launched the podcast with had moved on. I have other people who are helping me produce it now, but we've been weekly since August 2012.
Podcast is said to have changed or is still continuing to change the face of journalism. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think the podcast is just one of the ways journalism has changed, but it's also something that sort of thrived more so in the last 5 years, as more newsrooms begin to see the value of podcasting. Because it's not immediately recognizable as something different than what maybe public radio is doing in the United States, but because it's native to the internet, it's digital. These are digital audio files that you download. It actually resembles more streaming type video services where you're able to, search for topics that are of interest to you that you can download and listen to at any time of the day.
Journalism is also said to be facing a crisis in the age of digital media. How do you view this?
Is journalism in a crisis? Yes, it's been in a crisis since digital media has come along, and there have been thousands of journalists in the United States who've lost their job because of the way our industry is changing. Either they're not changing their approach to journalism, or more often their newsroom is sort of dragging its feet in adopting new approaches and trying and also finding new audiences for content. So, obviously that's a lot of the same issues that we deal with, trying to distribute our podcast, get more people to listen to it. But it's sort of a twofold thing. On the one hand, it's kind of the journalist's responsibility to, keep their skills fresh and, so they're able to participate in this new combination of traditional journalism and digital journalism. There needs to be an effort to identify revenue streams that are out there that are going to be able to support newsrooms online, and because that's where the audience is. This is not something it's all happening because we still have the same audience who's following the news in print. Much of that audience has shifted over to the digital space. And so, journalists and news outlets have to evolve in order to survive in this environment.
And Michael, any advice for those who are starting or probably is interested in starting their own podcast or even their own journalism podcast or starting a career in digital journalism? What will they face in terms of competition and the challenges, and how can one overcome them from your experiences in interviewing other fellow journalists?
Well, I mean that's a pretty big question with a lot of different parts. Let me sort of take it apart. Regarding podcasts, if you want to launch a podcast, launch a podcast. The two most important things are, identifying your audience and, who are they, what problem you're trying to solve for them, what information, are they going to be interested in, and then spending some time thinking about, what's going to make your podcast different than others. And, you spend a lot of time on that, you'll find that, especially in identifying the audience, it's important for you to be able to grow your audience and able to grow your podcast if you understand who they are and what your needs are. So that's a lot of work that you have to do up front before you get into the technical aspects of actually recording a podcast. So, get some digital skills, read a lot of different types of news outlets, and, begin to understand the importance of the traditional ethical guidelines that sort of push professional journalists forward in our current democracy.
Very well said. Thank you very much, Michael, for your advice. And we sure hope to see more professional journalists to help push forward our democracies in both of our countries. Thank you once again, Michael O'Connell, for being with us today. And we sure hope you do stay safe and healthy. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. You too.